Hello everybody and welcome to the first ever John Deere's Embroidery Legacy Sew and Share Challenge. Now this is going to be lots and lots of fun, but before we get started, I just want to remind you to make sure you have all of your supplies that are required for this project. You can make sure you have them by checking the PDF that was provided to you when you ordered this project. So with that being said, let's jump right in. So the way this project is going to work is we'll be doing it in 3 different pieces. We'll be doing the stocking first, then the tail, and then third we'll assemble the two together. So let's get started with step number 1, the stocking. Stocking, step number 1. So you want to make sure that you have a piece of tearaway stabilizer hooped and ready to go. Step number 2. Now we're going to go ahead and load the first design that was provided to you onto our machines, and then we're going to stitch it out. It's going to give us a nice placement stitch that we can follow along with for the rest of the project. Stocking step number 3, we are going to tape down some sparkly fabric right over top of the placement stitch that we just stitched out. For step number 4 of the stocking, we're simply going to run a tack down stitch right over top of that sparkly fabric that we just put on top of the hoop. Stocking, step number 5. So we're simply going to run a stocking stuff placement stitch around the top of the design, that way we know where to lay our white felt. For step number 6, we're simply going to lay down the white felt over our placement stitches, and we want to line it up just above the placement line. Step number 7 is we're just going to lay down some tack down stitches to keep our felt in place. For step number 8 of the stocking, we're going to fold the felt fabric down to the bottom and then fold it under to create a nice finished edge. Now that our felt is folded, we'll move on to step number 9 of the stocking, which is simply sewing that felt in place. Now for step number 10 of our stocking, we are going to fold the backing fabric in half and lay it over the stocking, lining it from the top of the cuff. Now just a quick reminder, if you're using a light fabric for the backing, you might want to fold in half for a little more sturdiness, and if your fabric is heavier, then 1 layer will be fine. Now for step number 11 of the stocking, we're simply going to tape down the backing or hold it in place and then run the following stitches. Now on to the final step of the stocking, step number 12. We're going to remove the project from the hoop and then begin to trim close to the stitches, being careful not to cut into them. Then we're going to remove the stabilizer, turn it inside out, and make sure the seams are flat. If need be, you can iron it, and then you're just going to set it aside for now. So now that the stocking portion of the project is completed, we can move on to the second part, which is the tail fin. So for step number 1, we're going to hoop our tearaway stabilizer. Moving on to step number 2 of the tail fin, we are simply going to stitch down our placement stitches using the second design file that was provided to you. For step number 3 of the tail fin, we are going to tape down some of our felt fabric, and then we're going to tape down some of the sparkling fabric right on top of it. For step number 4 of the tail fin, we are now going to continue with the design. It is going to lay down some placement stitches, a tack down stitch, and then it will run and do these decorative stitches that you see on screen right now. Next, in step number 5 of the tail fin, we are going to grab our backing fabric, fold it in half, and then we're going to place it over the tail fin. Now just to note, if you are using a shiny fabric, make sure the shiny sides are out. Now for step number 6, we're getting real close to finishing this tail fin. We are just going to stitch down our backing in place. And now finally, step number 7 of the tail fin, we are going to remove it from the hoop. We're going to trim real close, being careful not to cut into any of the stitches, and remove any tearaway stabilizer and then turn it inside out, and we can just set it aside for now. We are now into the third and final segment of this step-by-step process, assembly. So for step number 1, we're just going to hoop a piece of tearaway stabilizer. For step number 2 of the assembly process, you are going to be using the third and final design that was provided, and what's going to happen is it will stitch down a placement for the stocking that we can use to follow along with. Step number 3 of assembly is you are going to lay the stocking body into the guidelines that were just stitched down, and then we're going to tape it into place. Step number 4 of assembly is we are going to lay the tail fin slightly over the body and then tape it down in place as well. For step number 5 of the assembly, we are simply just going to run the joining stitches. And what this will do is connect the tail to the rest of the stocking. Congratulations, you have now made it to the final step, step number 6 of assembly. We are just going to remove it from the hoop and remove any tearaway that is left behind, and you'll be left with this incredible mermaid stocking. Thank you so much for joining the Embroidery Legacy in this month's Sew and Share Challenge.
I'd just like to extend a special thanks to our good friends at Twiga Industries. Without them, this video wouldn't have been possible, and it was a pleasure working on those incredible machines.